This is the Evergreen Empire.
Green grow the forests and fair flow the streams. The gentle deer grazes, the wild blossom gleams. From ocean wave raging to mountain serene, all nature's proclaiming our land's evergreen.
Welcome to Columbia Conversations. I'm Felix Bunnell, editor of Columbia Magazine for the Washington State Historical Society. On this episode, we speak with Clare Hatler of Sequim, Washington. 40 years ago, Clare was home one day when her late husband made an incredible discovery while digging on the family property with a backhoe.
And he said, well, they're laying in the grass there. Take a look. And I took one look and came unglued and told him, don't you dig another inch, get off the backhoe and get out of there. And I ran for the phone and I started phoning.
Clare Hatler recently donated those rare artifacts to the Washington State Historical Society. I spoke with her by phone from her home near Sequim about that long-ago discovery and about what she and her family did to make the most of the experience for themselves and for the community. Clare Hatler, thanks for joining us for this episode of Columbia Conversations. What is it that you found on your farm?
Well, this was back in August of 1977. My late husband, Emmanuel Manus, we called him Manny, decided to dig a pond down, and we live on a farm of 16 acres at the time. The lower pasture was marshy. So he decided to dig a pond down there. We had a few cows, and we'd only lived here a couple of years. Well, he took his backhoe down to the marsh and started to dig with the backhoe bucket a trench around what would eventually be a pond. He was digging about a few feet below, and the water table down there was only a few feet below the surface. So he started digging deeper, about 6 feet with a bucket. He went about 100 feet with his trench, the width of the backhoe bucket. And up in the bucket, with one of the bucket folds, it looked like a big log lying across the bucket, covered with mud. So he laid it aside on the bank, didn't get off the backhoe, took another shovelful, and another supposed log came up. Had a big curve in it, and it was a little white at one end, and he said, that's not wood. And so he set it down on the ground, jumped off the backhoe, and wiped the mud off both of them, and realized they were elephant tusks.
Wow.
In the 2 years he had lived here, mammoth tusks had been eroded out of the bluffs down near the Strait of Juan de Fuca near Sequim. And there would be pictures in the paper and so forth, and that would be the end of it. So when he saw them, he knew what they were, and he assumed they were mammoth tusks. And so we climbed back up in the backhoe and alerted me, started whistling. I was up at the house. It was a hot August day, and near supper time, so I knew he was going to be quitting pretty soon. And I went down to the site where he was digging and said, what do you want? Why can't you wait until you come up for supper? And he said, I found a couple of mammoth tusks. And I said, oh boy, you've been in the sun too long. I bet they're cow horns. And started to turn around and leave. And he said, well, they're laying in the grass there. Take a look. And I took one look and came unglued and told him, don't you, dig another inch, get off the backhoe and get out of there. And I ran for the phone and I started phoning. And eventually reached the archaeologists from Washington State University that were working at the Ozette site out at Nia Bay, below Nia Bay.
Yeah, because you said this was 1977?
This was in August of 1977.
Yeah, so you couldn't go to the internet. You couldn't probably look up you probably had to look in the white pages or the yellow. How did you track somebody down that long ago? I'm curious.
Well, I had to make quite a few phone calls, and I first called the science teacher in the local high school, our local high school, Squim High School. My younger son was a junior there, and asked her. I said, you must have come across this kind of stuff, and she said, oh yeah. She said, I said, well, can you give me advice? We want to know more about it. The prehistoric elephant in our front yard. I've not seen any information in the newspapers or anything else about it. It's just somebody finds a tusk or a tooth, and that's it. And she said, oh, great, start making calls. And the best suggestion, she said, was keep these tusks wet. They've been, because they were in a wet thing. She said, put them in water or something, because when the children, over the years that she had taught science, children had brought in pieces of tusk and so forth and bones, and they would just mostly tusk. And when they dry, they just kind of fall apart.
Oh, wow.
So immediately we did that. In the meantime, I called the University of Washington, and it was August, and the receptionist said, well, everybody's on vacation. A little later, to be sorry they said that. Anyway, I wanted to, I had read about the dig out at OZ site, and I thought, oh, they should know what they're doing. That's who I want to get a hold of. Well, how do you get a hold of an archaeological site on the coast of Washington, a little town called Neah Bay? And this, was, I don't know how many miles south of Neah Bay. No phones, no nothing like that, no cell phones. I called our library, the main library in Port Angeles, and talked to the librarian and told her we found 2 mammoth tusks in our front yard, and we'd like to find some archaeologists that would give us some more information and come and see. Well, she said, I'll find out if there's a phone number for them, because they've been there for years, and in Neah Bay. And sure enough, she came back in a few minutes, and she had the phone number of in Neah Bay, where they were that they used to treat the artifacts that they were removing from the OZ site. And I in fact, Richard Doherty was in charge of that. In fact, he was a Washington State he was the head of the Washington State Archaeological Research Center at that time. And I called, and he wasn't there right now. He was with some at the site. He called back shortly after and said, "Oh, yes, I'm very interested, and I will come by in a day or two." He had business to do out there with some reporters, and I will alert my assistants and other archaeologists from Pullman. Well, I had never heard of WSU. We only lived there 2 years, and my older son was ready to go to the UW in the fall. So I said, well, I need all the information I can get, so we'll wait for you. In the meantime, I had called the newspaper because they had put articles and pictures of mammoth tusks and so forth that the locals had found, and nothing more was said about it. And I said, is it still news around here? He said, yes. Because I said, I wanted to find out more about this prehistoric elephant in our front yard. So he's delighted to put the article in with a question mark under the picture of my husband with the tusk. We would appreciate more information about this. Well, a local gal who was a student of Dr. Doherty's at Pullman was in town with her family, and she called right away and came up and said, why don't you call the Washington State Office of Historic Preservation? Jeannie Welsh was the State Historic Preservation Officer, and she's an archaeologist. And I said, I didn't even know it existed. And made the call, and she was up here within hours in her camper, and she immediately looked into that trench, and she could see bones sticking out of the sidewall of the trench she had dug, and started, because it was hot and dry summer, and they were being exposed to the hot air, and she started covering with wet rags. And that's the way it started. And Dr. Doherty showed up and took a look, and listening to G.D. Welsh, knew immediately this was something, maybe a full skeleton of a mammoth. We're still calling it a mammoth because there's no evidence that it wasn't a mammoth. And because of other finds around here indicated these tusks that are eroding out of the bluffs down near the water would be mammoth tusks, because they found teeth. The indicator, if you're just finding a few bones of these ancient elephants. So he signaled his Dr. Carl Gustafson was in Pullman. He's a zoologist and works in the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology, and told him to bring equipment to start a wet dig in our front yard. With our permission, of course, right from the beginning, we said, you stay here as long as you want, but we don't feel that we own this history or prehistory, and we certainly would like to know more about it, and we'd like you to do whatever you can. So Dr. Gustafson put together the equipment, and with a grad student showed up within a day or two, and they started to work with water because, like I say, it's a wet site. And within a day or two, Dr. Gustafson found this broken piece of this animal's rib bone. And embedded in the rib bone was a bone point.
Wow.
Now, standing back and saying, how did this piece of bone become embedded in this rib bone of this animal? And of course, at this point, it was still called the mammoth. They had it x-rayed over in Bellevue and so forth, and found, yes, it penetrated the bone about 3/4 of an inch. It came to a point it was made of bone.
Wow.
Well, that was pretty exciting. So it continued, and the next day, an object
just to pause for a second. What that means is that some human had fashioned a spear tip out of other bone and had hunted this animal.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Wow, that's crazy.
Eliminating all other natural possibilities. Here it was setting in wet sediments that looked like the sediments from that was a pond thousands of years ago. Anyway, within a day or so, as they were washing down the sediments, something started to appear, and it looked like at first like it was a oyster shell. Well, after carefully washing it down and removing it, they realized it was a tooth.
Wow. A
very worn tooth, and it was not a mammoth tooth. It was a mastodon tooth. Now, the difference in these two Ice Age elephants, they both existed at the same time. They became extinct about 10,000 years ago, but there were two different species. The mammoths were grass eaters, like cows. They had different teeth, unlike our teeth. The teeth were made up of enamel pieces that ran vertically through the tooth, big tooth. They'd wear down that tooth eating the grass because they came in contact with a lot of grit and gravel. They get another teeth set. So a mammoth might get 6 or 7 sets of teeth in a lifetime. Well, this was not a mammoth tooth. It was a tooth very similar to our molars, a big tooth with the enamel on the top and dentine inside and roots just like our teeth. The mastodon were brush eaters like deer and elk. So when they get a permanent baby set of teeth and a permanent set, when they were worn out, they were worn out. And this tooth was worn right down to the gum line. So then the archaeologists, they don't, jumping down, up and down much, but they were really excited. And they said, well, we'd like to talk to you. And they said, this is a very important archaeological site, probably the most important at that particular time in the world. And what we have found here is the first direct evidence of man hunting mastodon on the North American continent. They had other evidence of mammoth kill sites and so forth being butchered, but they never had that direct, the smoking gun type of evidence about mastodon. So instead of coming here to remove maybe a skeleton with all the bones of a mammoth or a giant elephant and take it back to the universities for studies, this was something different. They had to, and it would affect us. They said, number one, it's not going to be a few days or a few weeks we're here to dig this out. It will take months, it could be years, and you'll lose that portion of your property. And and we have to contact the media because this is an open science, and we need the money to get grants and so forth to be able to have a field school and do this. And so this alerts, getting in the paper and so forth, alerts the politicians and so forth. They know about that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and so with our permission, because it's found on private property, it's up to the owner to decide whether go away, cover it up, I don't want to be bothered, or let us do what we can. We can't compensate you for the loss of your land. We can't pay you for all the possibilities of people coming and climbing over your barbed wire fences. We're right on a gravel road in the community south of Squim, and easily accessible by cars and people. And he said, once it gets in the newspaper, people will come. Well, all the people that come out to the OZ site, where they have to hike 7 miles out into the woods to the coast through the forest, they'll be here in droves once it hits the newspaper. So they told us all the bad side of it. And we said, we don't care. The most important thing is that you have found something that's unbelievable to a lot of people, and we want to know more, and we want to know what you're going to do, how you do it, and what it means. So don't look at us as some people sitting up at the house watching you do your thing down there. We want you to teach us what you're doing, and we want to know everything that you know about mastodons and prehistoric man and so forth. And they were delighted. They're teachers. That's what they do. And we said, no, do what you have to do. And Dr. Gordy suggested that that what we should do to protect our property, and so we wouldn't be liable if somebody got tangled up in the barbed wire or so on the site. So he suggested that they have a long driveway down to the street. The site itself is closer to the roadway, and they suggested put a gate up at the end of your driveway, put a sign out there saying, the way to control it, just like the state parks and the national parks do, you have control. So on the sign, say when you should let people in because it's, like I say, it's an important site. And so let people in at a certain hour when we're here digging, which will be probably in the summer times with the field school, say open 10 to 2 or something like that, and charge $1 or $2. This will turn around all the looky-loos who really aren't interested in archaeology. And this way, you can protect yourself with liability insurance so that you won't lose your house or anything else. So, we said, okay. So Manny got to work that fall after they left. They left 2 students there to do some small archaeology until it got too cold in the wintertime. But in the meantime, it wasn't put the gate up right away, and it was closed until further notice type of thing. And Manny turned our barn into a theater. He closed the front, put doors in and out, built benches, built a big screen, and then put together a slide presentation using photos that we had taken and Dr. Gustafson and Doherty had taken to show just what's down there. How did it happen?
Did Manny have any kind of a background in show business or in putting on shows or lectures, or what was his background?
He was a machinist.
So where did that come from him? That vision to turn the barn into a theater and put on a slideshow?
We both agreed. We didn't want people to come up here, just look at the site and know nothing about it. We wanted to educate people to just, as we were being educated.
That's
what
cool.
did they do first? They put grids over the site. They measure exactly. They photograph everything they've changed, and this is the way they it's a wet site. They use water to excavate with. All these things we didn't know, and we wanted. Anybody who came up there, we wanted to know what they were going to see when we took them down to the site.
That's cool.
So they came up into that barn first, showed the slides with a voiceover. Manny made a tape along with the slide. Exactly what happened. This is the way we found it. This is what the archaeologists are doing now, how you begin, and so forth. It was about 10 minutes presentation. It's still shown down in our local little history museum in Squim. So when we opened it, the site, he made moved fences back so the cows were away from the site and away from an area that area for the people to park. And we rented porta potties and that sort of thing. So the university gave us some cases, glass case display cases to put some of the bones in. The tusks were put in I like to say a tusk tank. Actually, it was a stock tank, and they fit it in very nicely, and they, of course, in water. So they would come up in the barn and see the displays, and then I would show them the slide presentation. It all took about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'd answer any questions they had, and then Manny would take them down to the site, and he made a path, a fenced path, and he fenced around the site itself so people wouldn't fall into the dig. And so we would go down there, and he would point different things out, and whoever was working at the site, whether it was Dr. Doherty or Dr. Gustafson or one of the grad students, would answer questions, and they could see, and they stayed there as long as they wanted. We did this from the first summer was 1978. The last summer was 1985. So every summer for 7 years, we had over 50,000 people come through our front yard.
Wow, that's crazy. And did you sell popcorn or souvenirs or anything?
I made T-shirts. and now Juliana, what she's good.
Wait, did you guys have a name for? Did you name your attraction something, or was it? I mean, what was it called?
The official name is the Mastodon site, named after the owner, Manis, M-A-N-I-S. And we were kind of sorry that my husband's father, who was born in Crete and came over as a teenager, changed his name when he came to America. His name was Manus Sudakis, 13 letters, and it would look perfect with a Manus Sudakis Mastodon. Can you imagine that?
What was your background? Did you have any sort of background that would have predicted that you guys would have put together this interpretive display and everything when this happened? Or what kind of work did you do?
Well, let me see. To begin with, I took engineering school, and my first job was the Carolina Power and Light Company. My husband was, his husband was going to school down there, and I was a substation design person, draftsman, more or less, design stuff for that. And then we moved up his hometown in Rochester, New York, and I worked for a company that made, well, anyway, I was a tool designer.
Okay.
I designed tools for a company that made automatic gear cutting machines. And then we moved out to Palo Alto, California, when Kodak opened a lab, a color lab there, and I worked for Hitler Helicopter as a R&D design person, an engineering office, basically.
All right. So you're an engineer, so you're used to putting together sort of systems. You're kind of designing things to accomplish tasks, like to kind of think things through. Okay. And so how many years were the how many years were the Washington State University people there working on the Mastodon?
8 years, from 77 when it was discovered to 1985. Closed it up.
So how old is that Mastodon? Did they ever pinpoint it?
The official date, and this was proven in 2011 by archaeologist down in Texas, and with all the new scientific methods, the DNR and so forth, the date comes 13,800 years ago.
Wow.
And the significance of that, it's earlier than the Clovis, so-called Clovis people. The Clovis, the earliest date they have is, I think, 13,300 years, or anyway. And so it's in contention. The people who believe that the Clovis points were the oldest and the people using them, really question this. So the fact now that these artifacts that Dr. Dustin put together for the past 30 years that now belong to the State Museum will be available for research as soon as we get there.
What's exciting to me is to think that you have your house there, and you're outside Squim, and then just outside the window, at some point in the past, 13,800 years ago, somebody was chasing a mastodon, or somebody was out there just trying to come up with food to feed themselves or feed their family or whatever. 13,800 years ago. That's mind blowing to me.
Oh yeah, it is to me, and that's Dr. Gustis always saying, who are these people? And he figured they were hunters and gatherers, or at least hunters, and maybe a family, say 24, 26 people, just followed the big game animals, and apparently it was right after the last ice age. These bones were found right on the glacial till, which is the material that was left behind as the ice retreated.
Wow.
So the ice here was 3,000 to 4,000 feet thick, from about 16 to 20,000 years ago. So by about this time, it had retreated and then and left behind this glacial till. This area has always been dry, and we don't get a lot of precipitation. So there was not when this animal died. There were no forests around here at that time. It was just they found seeds and pollen. It's like a peek into the past. It's just not about an ancient mastodon being butchered. They found evidence of bison, and a bison, prehistoric bison larger than the American bison of today, and other little animals. I was hoping they'd find something exciting like a saber-toothed tiger, but that wasn't, no, this didn't.
Was the thought that the mastodon that was hunted, did the thought that the humans actually butchered it, or did it get away and die on its own? Did they ever determine that?
Oh, yeah, by the way. The animal fell, they don't know how he died. He was wounded. He had that spear point in the leg. It didn't kill him, not that spear point in that rib bone. He was an old fella. His teeth were just about worn out. Yeah. He had a lot of arthritis and osteoporosis. And I really shouldn't say this. And
no, wait, are you talking about the mastodon, or are you talking about your husband now? Ha ha, just
right.
kidding.
He was just going to die like the rest of it. Anyway, if he was sick or if he was wounded, he came down to this pond, and like six animals too, and he was fed had died or he was finished off. But the bones of his left side were laying on the bottom, on the bottom surface on the glacial till in pretty good shape, except where the backhoe went through some of them. And they had forgiven Manny for that. But the other bones were missing, the bones from his right side. As the animal decayed, those bones should have fallen right on top of the left side. And then as they excavated away from that trench, they started finding butchered pieces of bones. Not all the bones, but many pieces of butchered bones and other evidence that, yes, indeed, he was butchered.
Wow.
They figured out they had removed the tusks from the head and turned the head, removed the head, and then broke into the head probably to get the brain.
Wow.
So there was, yes, end of indication. Yes.
Did they find any other tools or other evidence that the humans left behind?
That they found a few flake stones. The stone in this area, especially before anybody did any trading, is really lousy. It's a poor basalt, and it makes a poor tool. So they used bone. The bone was actually stronger than the local stone. And they found a couple of pieces of Mastodon bone from probably a previous kill. DNA proved it wasn't from the same animal. And, flaked and shown like a scraper. It could scrape the flesh off it. And so a couple of bone instruments. And all of these little artifacts are now in the museum in Tacoma now. And Dr. Gustafson went through this for 30 years, all the material that he removed from the site that looked like they were butchered or so forth. So all this evidence will be available now. I haven't seen it. We've had the boxes full of all his material. He died 2 years ago, so we've had it right here until I could put it in a safe place in the state museum.
That is great.
It will tell the tale, and
it's so generous of you. Number one, I mean, it's such a great. I don't know. It's almost happenstance that your husband found the Mastodon in the first place, and that you guys were both so receptive to the idea of using this to educate yourselves, and then sharing that with the people who came. And then I just love the idea of you guys building your own interpretive center in the barn. There's something about that's like quintessentially something about that's sort of American to me, which I love. It's just that sense of like, here it is. Here's this great opportunity to kind of put on a show, but also edify people at the same time. And then now for these artifacts to come to the museum is just really cool. That's really generous of you guys. And I love the big picture thinking you guys seem to have always had. That's awesome.
Well, it was a gift, a wonderful gift, a gift to the world.
Yeah.
And if we could, make people understand how important the past is, especially, and we're always thinking today and tomorrow, and so little about the past. It was a wonderful opportunity to educate people. We felt like we were teachers. And in fact, Manny did teach when we lived in California. He taught machine tool technology, so he was basically a teacher, and always teaching our sons what to do. And yes, it was a great opportunity.
How did your sons feel about the whole thing, having people coming to the house and the barn with a slideshow and everything?
Oh, they were, in the beginning they were delighted. My one son was up in Alaska fishing, and then when he came back, he was really excited. My other son, like I say, he was ready to go to school over at the University of Washington, and he was entering the School of Geology, so it was like having a field school in his front yard.
Wow.
But they were as excited as we were, and it's interested.
I mean, I think people probably find things in their yards every day, but it sounds like you guys probably hit the jackpot. Now, did you ever get a chance to build a pond someplace else on the property?
Oh yes, we had 16 acres, and so to the west, Manny dug another pond, and there were 2 8-acre parcels, and the western parcel with the pond we sold to buy a sailboat in 1989. And when he had that one, when he dug that, he was very careful to go through all the sediments and found nothing.
I bet.
Then, they had taken samples of the core samples all over our property to make sure that there wasn't any other thing. But directly around that pond, they found another evidence of another mastodon, actually 3 or 4.
Wow.
Just small evidence of a broken tooth, or a few other bones. Probably at a either earlier, a little later date than that. Or should I say, earlier date.
Wow.
Earlier.
That's amazing. Clare Maness Hatler, thanks for joining us on Columbia Conversations, and thanks for your generous donation to the museum so those wonderful artifacts can be shared with researchers and museum visitors and everything. And just what a cool story. I'm really glad that it was your family that found that mastodon, and that you shared it with everybody. It's wonderful.
It is everybody.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you to Clare Maness Hatler for speaking with me for this episode of Columbia Conversations from the Washington State Historical Society. Photos of the Mastodon artifacts are featured in the summer 2019 edition of Columbia Magazine. For more information about Columbia Magazine or to subscribe, please visit washingtonhistory.org. I'm Felix Bunnell.